Towards the end of the Formula 1 season, you'll typically see some kind of shake-up, especially if a team has nothing to play for the rest of the season, and they want to try and get things done ready in time for next season, where they might be able to get a tiny bit of a head start. And to be honest, this has been happening for decades. All of those teams that decided to bin off the turbos for 1988, knowing that they'd be banned at the end of the year and switching to naturally aspirated, just to get a head start on the development. And teams like Honda, which later became Brawn, and also Red Bull, coming into the 2009 season looking much better than Ferrari and McLaren, simply because McLaren was locked in that epic battle with Ferrari during the 2008 season, which meant all resources, or at least the vast majority of said resources, got put into that season, and it left them with less time to get ready for 2009. See also the 2014 rule changes, as Renault and Ferrari entered the hybrid era with quite the deficit to Mercedes, because Mercedes had started their hybrid program much earlier. It's the racing equivalent of somebody starting their homework or university assignment the day it was given out, versus the ones that left it till the morning of it being due in. And I knew several people at the University of Wolverhampton who smashed out an assignment through starting it at 2 AM and getting it done in time for the 9 AM submission deadline. Mental. So what's been happening recently then? Well, the big news this week, which broke on Tuesday or Wednesday, I can't remember when it was because I've been quite ill this week. It's just been an iffy stomach, but I've kind of been forcing my way through this week's worth of videos on autopilot because the algorithm and also, money, is that Dan Fallows is going to be leaving Aston Martin. Well, leaving his position at Aston Martin, and he's going to go somewhere else within the group. And this is thought to be some sort of big shake-up happening for Team Silverstone. Fallows joined Red Bull in 2006 and had been at Red Bull when it was still Jaguar. In that time, he, like Newey, was part of the team's formative years and into the Sebastian Vettel domination years, before leaving the team in 2021 to go and join Aston Martin. At the time, it was seen as being a massive deal, because Fallows had been working under Newey for a very long time and was kind of his protege, if you want to call him that, so it was hoped that the knowledge he picked up from Newey would be something that Aston Martin could take advantage of, given Lawrence Stroll's ambition to get near the front of the grid. Fallows will still remain part of the Aston Martin group, but where he's moving to is unclear. They haven't announced it yet, so it could be somewhere still within the F1 team or the Valkyrie project in the WEC. The new ground effect era started out in a not-so-fun manner for Aston Martin. They finished 7th in the championship, the same place they'd finished in 2021. And to be fair to them, the 2022 season was a season of discovery for some teams, as they grappled with the new ground effect regulations, the cost caps, and how best to tame the porpoising and other things that came with it. Things like stiffer suspension required to maintain ride height and setting the car up to be as pointy as the old cars had been, but without losing too much of said ground effect that the cars are now relying heavily on. They did get a podium in 2021, but after that the best the car could do was hover around the tail end of the points. Vettel would end the 2022 season on 37 points, the same amount of points as Ricciardo, while Stroll finished on 18. So moving into 2023, things were starting to look promising. Vettel had left Formula 1 and Fernando Alonso was into great fanfare, with Vettel leaving and Alonso signing being pretty much the kickstarter for that whole mess surrounding Alpine and Piastri, as Piastri went to McLaren instead, and that was incredibly interesting to learn more about. But while Aston's season did start promising, with Alonso bagging some great results with 6 podiums in the opening 8 races, that was going to be as good as it got. Aston did have an incredible season, all things considered. They improved on the 2 7th place finishes in a row and upgraded that to a 5th place, with 280 points on the board. Alonso scored 206 points and Stroll scored 74. And to add to this, Alonso finished 4th in the drivers' standings, level on points with Leclerc but ahead on countback, while a point ahead of Norris and 6 ahead of Sainz. But while we're here, we'll address the elephant in the room regarding those points hauls. Aston in 2023 were in this weird little bubble where they were almost in their own little class in the pecking order. They were 22 points behind McLaren, which, alright, isn't that great of a gap since 22 points can be made up pretty easily with the current point structure, but they were 160 ahead of Alpine in 6th. And then that brings into account something else. If it had been someone other than Stroll in the other car, how many more points could have been achieved? What if Piastri or Drugovich had come in to replace the boss's son? Answers on a postcard, but the point remains. There was some performance on the table that Aston should have been able to bring forward into 2024, but that hasn't happened. This year has been quite disastrous for them compared to last year. They still sit 5th, so once again the same place as last year, but they failed to break the 3-figure mark in terms of the points. Alonso's best result so far has been 5th, taken at the Saudi Grand Prix back in March or whenever it was, and he did get 7th with the fastest lap in China for an extra bonus point. But from Miami onwards, it's been hit and miss. The lead Aston crossed the line 9th at Imola, 11th in Monaco, a nice 6th in Canada, but 12th in Spain, then 13th in Austria, back into the points at Silverstone with a 7th, 10th in Hungary, 8th in Belgium, 10th at Zandvoort, 11th at Monza, 6th at Baku, which gave them hope, but then back down to 8th in Singapore, before a current runner 13th in Austin, 11th at Mexico, and 14th at Sao Paulo. But Sao Paulo is a forgiven anomaly because Alonso walled it in qualifying and they had to rebuild the car in quite a hasty fashion. And they put it back together in such a hasty fashion that after the race, Alonso could barely walk. And I know that people are loving to meme on Lance at the minute, and especially so after that utterly embarrassing moment on the formation lap at Sao Paulo, but let's factor in his results. I hope I can fit all of this onto the screen given how many races there are this season and Wikipedia result sheets are just getting wider and wider and wider. But there was a period in the mid part of the season where his results compared to Alonso weren't exactly rubbish. In Monaco, Alonso was 11th with Stroll in 14th. In Canada, the cars came home 6th and 7th, 14th to Nando's 12th in Spain, a 13th at Austria, line astern again at Silverstone. He came home ahead of Alonso at Hungary, just outside the points at Spa, 13th at Zandvoort, and it's only since Monza that his race performances have been utterly terrible, save for the 11th in Mexico City. But that's the thing with Lance Stroll. When he's doing okay, he's okay. He's not great, but he's not terrible. But when it goes wrong in a bigly fashion. See Sao Paulo for, well, some recent examples. But Aston has gone through quite the drop-off in 2024. At the start of the season, Alonso was able to get inside the top 6 in 4 of the 5 Grand Prix that began the season. But at the end of the race in Miami, Aston were just 12 points behind Mercedes, which should have been a cause of optimism given how much Mercedes have struggled over the course of 2024. This not including the patch during the European leg of the season, where they won 3 races with Spa almost being a return to form. But they're still firmly in the shadow of Red Bull, McLaren and now Ferrari, who have hit their stride again. While McLaren and Ferrari have made massive gains, Mercedes' improvements have been more marginal, but at Aston they've not managed to properly extract much from what they've been bringing. The Race, who have done some very handy cut out and keep graphs that, despite what you might think of their driver ratings or British bias, do paint a decent picture with the numbers that they have on hand. While Wikipedia will have the stats for the whole season, the Race is very good at giving you the stats over a particular time frame. Monaco for Aston was a complete shower. The 2 cars were 14th and 16th because traffic got in the way in the first qualifying session, meaning that they weren't able to get the lap in that they would have wanted, so there is mitigating circumstances there because Monaco gone Monaco. But the way that the team has gone about their upgrades this year has just been, well, baffling. It's probably worse than what's happened to Red Bull. A lot worse. The big story of the 2024 season was McLaren dumping all those upgrades at once onto the car, and the results were revelatory. Norris won in Miami, and given another lap or so at Imola, he probably could have won there too. This, coupled with Red Bull's bizarre regression since that same Miami Grand Prix, which led to an uncharacteristic dry spell between Canada and the last win in Brazil, opened the season right up. Ferrari and Mercedes have also offered intermittent upgrades, which in most cases have been updates rather than upgrades, but that's something else entirely. While Aston's upgrade path can only be described as aggressive. The aggressive upgrade path has knackered the drivability of the car. While Stroll has had the majority of the spins and other driver-related errors, Alonso isn't exactly immune. The upgrades on the car are barely adding performance, and the 1-lap pace of the car is dropping off more and more, with that slump beginning in Australia, going back up slightly for Suzuka and China, and then dropping off entirely across Miami and Imola, with Monaco being the already mentioned outlier due to the look of the draw with traffic. Aston had actually brought a new lower drag rear wing to Miami in the hopes that it would, well, reduce drag, but as Autosport mentioned at the time, Aston abandoned using it after practice and reverted to an older spec of rear wing after it was determined that the new wing had taken off too much drag, and the resultant loss of rear downforce meant that the car was sliding around too much and destroying the tyres. A lower drag wing will increase top speed, but the losses in the corners and the shortening of the tyre life meant that Aston had to weigh up the pros and cons and decided to sacrifice top speed for that tyre life. Then, much like McLaren had done at Miami, Aston brought a massive upgrade package to Imola that changed the front wing, nose, floor, diffuser, engine cover and rear suspension. Upgrades that left the ones brought by Ferrari for their first home race of the season in quite a big shadow, despite Ferrari bringing a massive upgrade package of their own. And this didn't bring the desired effects either, as Alonso was eliminated in the first qualifying session and Stroll ended up 13th, while the Alpine of Ocon, which was also in its piece of shit phase, beat them both. So all those upgrades and none of them worked. So did they just do what Red Bull did but worse? Did they break a good car? Sort of. Remember how tricky the Mercedes cars were in the beginning of, 2018 or so, and then the beginning of 2021 with the new floor rules? And also the 1994 Williams being twitchy as hell. The upgrades that Aston has been putting on the car have made the thing so hit and miss that the hits have yielded some, decent returns in Alonso's hands. But the misses have been Imperial Stormtrooper levels of missing. The car has such a narrow setup window that it's about as wide as an eyelash, and not even Alonso with his experience and 2 world championships is going to make that work all the time. While Alonso is going to naturally be the benchmark of what the Aston is capable of, the car's trickiness was exposed when Alonso crashed in practice at Imola. Then the 2 drivers trashed the cars in the wet in Brazil. This could have been down to the narrow window of the car being set up as opposed to skill issues. If Lance spins it, then everybody will default to the skill issue argument, but if Alonso goes into the wall as well, then maybe it's not just the driver at fault. Aston had brought a brand new floor for the race in Austin, but ended up using floors from Japan and Hungary over the course of the last race weekend. As Aston's Tom McCulloch explained, hitting the downforce targets and achieving the downforce targets is relatively easy with these new regulations. The key part is managing it and making the car balanced all the time. Something that McLaren's been able to do since they brought their upgrades at Miami, and also something that Red Bull has been able to do all through 2022 and 2023, and something that they've now kind of undone over the course of 2024. But Aston hasn't been able to do that, and when they have, they've brought in the upgrades that hit the downforce numbers, but they induce other problems. So maybe then this is why Fallows is out. While Fallows had been a great servant to the Red Bull operation from its formative years through its domination period and up to its return to the top, this regression seems to have been the worst thing that could have happened to Aston Martin. Like mentioned, they haven't got anywhere near the amount of points they had last season. Alonso's early season success was encouraging, but it wasn't anywhere near the 2023 performance. And some are wondering if the anomaly of 2023 with Red Bull being so good and the other 3 teams being so inconsistent, that allowed Aston to be up there taking points off Ferrari and Mercedes. It's entirely possible. Then you've got Enrico Cardilli coming in from Ferrari and also Adrian Newey coming in, and they will be coming into positions above Fallows. So it looks like that Aston wasn't ready to promote within, at least that's how it looks. But the bigger question is, was Fallows pushed or did he jump? And on top of this, was all of this upgrade path his idea? Was the aggressive chasing of upgrades to get the performance and just lobbing stuff at the car and hoping it would stick, at least that's what it looks like, his doing? And also on top of this, you've got Adrian Newey coming in. So maybe Aston Martin's looked at the situation and gone, right, we don't need Obi-Wan Kenobi. We've got Jedi Master Yoda. We've got the guy who knows everything here, so we don't need you anymore. So not only have you got Cardilli coming in from Ferrari and Adrian Newey coming in from Red Bull, there's also the arrival of Andy Cowell. He was Mercedes engine guru and he'll be joining as the Chief Executive Officer, replacing Martin Whitmarsh. Newey and Cowell won't be magic bullets, especially with Newey having very little if anything to do with next year's car, and Cowell has been out of Formula 1 for a few years, so he's going to be re-entering a world where he won't have a blank cheque to spend thanks to the cost caps, and the world he left 4 years ago is completely different to how it is today. As I've said a couple of times, you're so 1990 and it's 1994. But as I've also said, is that Stroll seems to have his priorities in check. He's a guy that seems to genuinely want his team to do well, and we've seen in the last couple of years, and you might have seen it if you've been to Silverstone in the last couple of years, that the Aston factory down there at Silverstone is a construction site. They're getting all new facilities like a state-of-the-art simulator and a wind tunnel that they'll be able to use to get development done. And with Newey on board being the design genius as we've seen, it might mean that any future upgrades can be ironed out before they go onto the car and have the desired effect. Cal probably won't have much to do now, but his engine experience with Mercedes might translate over towards Honda, and if the relationship between his guys and Honda's guys works well, then there's a budding romance there too. Stroll is ambitious, there's no denying. It just seems that his ambition is being knocked back by what's happening. It just seems that there's mismanagement everywhere. And with Newey on board, Aston won't be as quick to just copy everybody else like they have been in the past. The pink Mercedes was great, but it sucked in the second year of its use. They also copied the F15 style radiator intakes first used by Red Bull, which gave them an edge, but now everybody else is using something similar, and on top of Aston's botched upgrades that have been coming, it's all added up to them going backwards. I know it's kind of the thing to say this looks interesting and I hope it goes well because of this and this and this and this, but for Aston Martin and Stroll Sr., 2026 might be the bit where he needs it to go well. Because, to paraphrase one comment I've seen on an internet, Stroll can't beat the seat I don't deserve allegations, Fallows can't beat the fraud allegations, Fernando can't beat the old and past it and will never get a third title while every team he joins goes backwards, so there must be a pattern accusations, and Stroll, Senior that is, can't beat the lob money at the problem until it goes away accusations. But if Alonso is having problems with the car and is saying that the car isn't much better than it was last year, then blaming Lance for every problem that Aston Martin has isn't exactly fair. Yes, his formation lap thing was embarrassing, but he's not the one making the shit upgrades. As somebody else said, you've got to be quite the basic fan to think that the car sucks because of Lance. There are still questions to be asked of both drivers though, but that's another video I'll have to do at another point, because I've kept you here long enough and you've probably got better things to do. So then, a look at what's happening over at Aston Martin and why the arrival of Newey can't return results soon enough. If this thing has made you think things about the thing, then like this thing so I know I did a good job. And for more things from this channel, click the subscribe button thing and ring the bell thing so you never miss out on any thing that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever to the kind folk at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help out with things, then a link to Patreon is down in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and bobs you might want or need to know. Or the super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships for a Patreon alternative if you want it. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.